Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Oh, welcome to this podcast review for February 10th, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brennan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, where I have my heart and eyes set on you as we have this conversation about hard eyes.
I could see them shining. I can see them shining
can you
bright
see
red. I can see the shapes
yeah.
there. Man, I see you developing a murderous spirit right now.
Yeah, exactly. If you look close enough, I have carved a heart, like the shape of a heart, into my eyeball.
That's
for
gross.
This episode.
That's gross.
Yeah.
Not need to hear that part.
Yeah, my wife recently told me that she had a friend of hers get the white part of her eyes tattooed to be like a blue color. I didn't even know that was possible. That's crazy. That's
heard
insane.
about
People
that.
are nuts.
I couldn't do that. Just the thought of it is
no
just
way.
making me quiver.
I don't know how that happens. I don't want to know how that happens, but it sounds awful. If that is your thing, though, good for you.
Ow.
Yeah, just not for me.
All I have to say about that is ow.
Yeah, not for me. At any rate, we're here to talk about Hard Eyes, which is the romantic comedy slasher film that just came out over the weekend, as we are all leading up to Valentine's Day this Friday.
Yeah.
And what better way to celebrate Valentine's than to watch a movie about a serial killer, as we all do.
Gotta love the Valentine's Day weekend, or at least these movies leading up to Valentine's Day, because you have one that's about relationships getting murdered, or you have another movie that's just so bad it might murder your own relationship. So it's like I feel like Valentine's Day is really not the happiest of places this year, according to the movies.
Yeah, it might not be. There's also the Kristen Stewart film that I've been
with
wanting
Stephen
to
Yeun.
see.
Yeah, Love Me.
Yeah, and Stephen Yeun. That one is called, what is that one called?
It's called
something?
Love Me. Love Me.
Love Me. So you can love me, or you can love hurt, or you can hard eyes, whichever one.
I guess you can also companion.
You can also companion as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe do a little dog man. Who knows?
Not to get too off topic, but all these movies, these quote-unquote romance movies that are leading into Valentine's Day have very interesting gimmicks to them. You know what the story is for Love Me, the Kristen Stewart, Stephen Yeun film? Apparently, it's about a relationship between a satellite and a buoy.
That, of course. That's what we would have expected, yeah.
Sounds like the greatest love story of all time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And look, I love Kristen Stewart. I love Stephen Yeun. Despite its middling reviews, I do want to see it.
Same.
I just haven't had an opportunity quite yet, but I will eventually catch up with that one despite the reviews. I do wish that we would have had maybe an opportunity to talk about it here on the show, but that's a film that hasn't had much fanfare. We decided to do Hard Eyes instead.
Yeah.
So here we are. Slasher film leading up to Valentine's Day, as we noted. Are you ready to dive into this one, Brendan?
Oh, yeah. Let's see those heart eyes of yours glisten.
All right. Let's do it. Hard Eyes. It is directed by Josh Ruben. It stars Olivia Holt, Mason Gooding, Jordana Brewster, Michaela Watkins, Devin Sawa, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with Hard Eyes, for the past several years, the Ghostface Killer. I'm sorry, I got it mixed up here. The
Wrong
Hard Eyes
movie.
Killer has wreaked havoc on Valentine's Day by stalking and murdering romantic couples. This Valentine's Day, no couple is safe. All right. Hide your kids, hide your wife, as they say. Brendan, what did you think about Hard Eyes?
I mean, it would make for a great Scream film, wouldn't it? Like, what if Scream made the transition from horror to romantic comedies, where everyone knows everything about romantic comedies and Ghostface is hunting them instead? That is essentially what this movie is, just without
Yeah.
without the cleverness, right?
There's a reason I bring Scream into this because, for one, this film is very meta as it relates to cinema. There are a lot of cinematic references here that the film is brazen about. And also, the Hard Eyes Killer is something that is very mainstream. So there are people walking around with masks on, as we see in the Scream movies. So there's a very clear influence there.
It is. It's very much a low rent Scream in many ways. We should also note that this was co-written by Christopher Landon, who wrote and directed movies like Freaky, as well as both Happy Death Days, Happy Death Day to You, the sequel to that one. I think all three of those movies are more interesting than Hard Eyes. Personally, I think they're doing more interesting things. Hard Eyes is a movie where I kind of feel ashamed to admit that I did enjoy it. I enjoyed my time with it. Yet I can't really articulate why. I mean, I can articulate why, but I can't sit here and say that I think it's actually a good movie. In fact, I don't necessarily think it's very good at what it's trying to do. Like I said, it's a very low rent Scream. It's really living in that shadow in many ways. And I think as a horror film, as a slasher film in particular, it doesn't need to reinvent the wheel, but I at least want it to compel me. I at least want its visceral thrills to match the cleverness of its high concept. And I think it is a movie that maybe does ultimately get by on just the sheer intrigue of its concept. I do like the story here. I like the overall conceit of this movie. And I think in some ways that maybe was enough to save it. It also does help that you have two leads here with great chemistry. Olivia Holt and Mason Gooding, I do think are terrific together. I don't necessarily think they're terrific or even interesting characters. In fact, when they're not on screen together, the movie really does stumble. Thankfully, 90% of the movie is them gawking at each other's beauty, right? So most of the movie works in that regard as really more of a rom-com than anything else. I think the rom-com elements here between the two of them is really when the movie's at its best. The horror stuff is thrown in for good measure for whatever reason. The conceit of it is at least interesting enough to keep me engaged, but I think there was a more clever and an interesting version of this film trying to break out that just couldn't quite get there, which is why I say someone like Christopher Landon, who co-wrote this, I think he's done more interesting projects in the past. I don't think this is quite one of them. So kind of a mixed bag for me, but I did have fun because I think the leads together on screen are really electric. And I think that is really, really all it needs to have in order for it to count.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because I saw this off the heels of Love Hurts. And for those that did not listen to our conversation on Love Hurts, the short of it is that I did not like that film at all. I thought it was
the movie
really,
hurt. The movie hurt.
really
We
bad.
made that joke a lot.
It was a hurtful experience.
When I
love
said
Ke
earlier,
Quan, God bless him.
When I
but-
said earlier that there are two Valentine's theme movies coming out this weekend, or at least already out, one of them about relationships getting murdered, and the other one that might murder your own relationship if you take someone with you. Love Hurts is the one that might kill your relationship.
Yeah, it's not good. It's really, really bad. So I saw Hard Eyes off the heels of that, and maybe that helps explain why I also enjoyed this as well. I did have
You know where to
some
go
fun
but
with
up.
this.
Nowhere to go but up.
You can know where to go but up. Now, I will say, I do think this film is frustratingly derivative as a horror film. I think it is extremely tepid and tropey in that regard. I did not really care for its slasher qualities. The film leaves a lot to be desired in that regard. However, I am completely with you. I did find it charming as a romantic comedy. I think Olivia Holt and Mason Gooding have electric chemistry and a wonderful dynamic that I did quite love. I do appreciate the film's goofy meta qualities and cinematic references, as I noted earlier. I'm just going to spoil this. I'm sorry. I'm just going to spoil this. So if you haven't seen the film, and look, this isn't a plotting issue or a plotting spoiler. I'm just going to give away two characters here. There are two cops in this film trying to find this serial killer.
I love
and
this.
the the detectives' names are Detective Hobbs and Detective Shaw. And I am assuming that all of us collectively had the same thought when we found out that it was Hobbs and Shaw, as like, oh, like the movie, to which a character in this film says explicitly, like, oh, like the movie? Like, they blatantly call it out, which I don't know. I found that hilarious. I'm like,
And of,
okay, this is the kind of movie it's going to be.
and of course, one of those two detectives is played by an actor who is
Who
very
is
well
it?
known for that franchise.
Yeah.
Which apparently, from what I understand, I did some research on this. That wasn't technically the intent. I think that was always in the script before Jordana Brewster was even cast in the movie. So I think it just added for a nice like little bonus to make that quality even more meta. Another step to that.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. I do appreciate how brazen and obvious that it is.
Yeah, I thought that was really funny. And again, maybe it's because I think us as the audience are kind of in on the joke. As soon as you hear that their names are Hobbs and Shaw, you can't help but think about Hobbs and Shaw from that franchise or that movie, as Hard Ice calls it out. Like the movie? Like I
And of
love
course,
that.
they have
So,
no
like,
idea what she's talking about when she references that. They're
yeah,
like,
it's
what movie? Never seen that movie.
it's really great. So like I do love how the film is meta in that regard. And there are a lot of movie references here. Like there's a whole sequence where a character, and forgive me, I'm trying to remember which one it was. I think it was Allie's friend. Was
Oh,
I
yeah. I'm trying to
I think
think
it
of
was
her name
Monica.
also.
I think it was
Okay,
Monica,
okay.
played by Gigi Zimbato. At the end of, I think it's near the end of the film, right? Because she's trying to get Allie to reconnect with Jay, and she goes on this monologue where she's just referencing all of these rom-coms, but it's like built into the like the sentence structure to kind of make sense for the moment. It's kind of working as like within the context of the film, but also as this just goofy meta
It's
exercise.
it's sort of this movie's
It's
version
like
of
ad libs.
when it's sort of this movie's version when Ghostface tries to quiz his victims on horror movies, right? And they
Yeah,
keep on
it's
throwing
kind of
these
like that.
references
Yeah.
in there. Yeah.
Yeah, so I love how self-aware the film is in that regard. I think it is having a lot of fun. So like when the film is acting as a rom-com or as a comedy at large, I actually think the film is quite hilarious. Like the van scene is another one that I really appreciated. I thought that was
It's supposed to be
really,
this
really
heart to
hilarious.
heart, and you've got this backing noise that just never ends.
It's just constant. It's so good. Like I love that.
But like the
one
film,
of my
like the
favorite
film,
scenes of the year.
the film treats it, and this is also maybe a huge credit to director Josh Ruben. He treats that scene as as a genuine heart to heart, and yet never
Yeah.
lets up on what that background noise is, which we will not
Yes.
reveal for
Yes.
spoilers' sake. But in fact, as it gets more emotionally moving, the noise gets louder in the background.
Yes, it's a great polarity. And I agree. I could not have said it better myself. The conversation between Allie and Jay is genuinely heartfelt. It is a quintessential rom-com moment that the film does treat very sincerely. And it's juxtaposed with the noise in the background that is just so good. Yeah, I love that. So yeah, when the film is working in that from that perspective, I think it is really good. Unfortunately, I do think, once it gets into the horror, it just gets so tropey and tired, and I just didn't find any of it interesting at all. I don't think it does anything. Like it just feels like the film wants to be a comedy more than it wants to be a horror film, but the horror kind of helps sets up the comedy, so it's kind of a necessary evil.
They need to work together in a very in a very systematic way, and I don't think they quite get there.
I
I
agree.
do think, and especially for a movie like this that has such a high concept, that is, like I said, the concept itself I think is pretty clever. I just wish both avenues of this movie, the rom-com side and the horror side, were able to match that cleverness, and sadly, only one half of it does. Because as a horror film, it is very derivative. I like the design of this killer. I actually think the design itself is pretty okay. But the kills themselves are I mean, sure, they're graphic. You want them to be graphic and grotesque in a movie like this, but that can only get you so far, right? What you and I at least look for is a little bit of creativity in how that grotesquerie is also portrayed, and that's the thing that I think is severely missing here.
Well, I agree, and I just don't think there's any creativity when it comes to the horror, and I think that's my problem with it. Right? It's we're gonna take them to the little merry-go-round thing at night. Okay, how many times have we seen that before? Like it just does nothing new. Or going back to the drive-in, there's the kill. I don't want to spoil it, but there's a kill where someone's face is shoved through a sharp object and the head comes up and you got the giant hole that the camera wants to go through. Like how many times at this point have we seen that? Like that's what this film.
We've seen some variation of that.
Extremely derivative. It just and look, I guess to be fair to the film, as I noted earlier, this is a movie that wants to reference other movies. It is very brazen in that regard. So maybe I should be a little lenient even when it comes to the horror, that it wants to, it wants to show reverence to these other horror films that have done these things, all the way down to the Scream of it all, and how this film is very, very inspired by Scream. But I still I think it's because the comedy and the rom-com of it was working so well on its own terms that like the references, like when it's, for example, going back to Monica's little monologue, like when she's referencing other rom-coms, it is a complementary element to what is happening in the context of this film. It's not something that the film is leaning on in terms of the conflict between those two characters or the romance between Allie and Jay. It is a complementary piece. Same thing with like the Hobbs and Shaw element. That is just a fun moment for Allie in this film that just gives her character some nuance. That's not what the horror is doing. The horror is just straight up imitation and nothing else than that. Like that's all that it is.
And if the film is trying to prioritize itself as a comedy first, then I guess that's fine. In many ways, maybe it does succeed in that regard. But it also creates an imbalance, and that's an imbalance that can maybe feel a bit jarring when there is that missing gap there, right? Yeah. So I do think that is sorely missing for like people like you and I who see a lot of movies. We also see a lot of horror movies, and there are a lot of horror movies out there. They're doing very different things tonally. Some are trying to be horror comedies in their own way. There are a lot of very successful new horror comedies out there that are doing very creative things. And, Josh Ruben's a filmmaker that does apparently have a bit of a history with being pretty creative with his horror comedies. I did not see his past films, but I heard a lot of great things about Werewolves Within. And from what I understand, that's one that apparently does balance that even more seamlessly. But here there is a bit of a mismatch here. And we notice it more when one is working so much more successfully than the other.
Yeah. And I think that's what it is. There's just a massive imbalance, a huge chasm between the quality of the romance and the comedy of this film versus the horror, which I just think is, again, frustratingly trite and not attempting to do anything interesting or unique or different. It just wants to pander to everything that you've seen before in that regard. And so, I just didn't find the film all that entertaining or compelling when it's acting as a horror film. And in the way that it crystallizes, heavily foreshadowing what's going to take place there in that chapel there at the end.
It's very non-surprising. You can see it coming a mile away, and it's even the way it's portrayed tonally, the dialogue from these particular reveals, it's ripped directly from the Scream playbook to the point that it's almost a distraction.
Big time from the Scream playbook, yeah.
Yeah. That again, the thing that does work is the dynamic between the two leads. If you have to buy into the fact that they do now quote unquote love each other, that part works. That part does work. The circumstances and the plotting surrounding that, I don't think really works. And that's unfortunate too. Like, I want to see a better version of this movie. If there was ever a sequel announced, I'd actually be on board with it. If I would, hoping that there was maybe a tighter and more surprising end to the horror side of things that could then match the the heightening qualities of the rom-com. But as it is, there's one element that's just working better than the other.
Yeah, I agree. And that's ultimately where I stand on the film and why, despite my overall enjoyment, I am quite mixed on the film overall. But I do think the rom-com of it all, the chemistry between Holt and Gooding, that is so good that it quite easily trumps the mundanity of the horror for me, that
Yeah.
I was easily able to still enjoy this. And I can't emphasize enough, I don't think I've done a good enough job even in this conversation of echoing what you said earlier as far as Holt and Gooding and like the way they stare at each other, the way they talk to each other in this film, the way they kind of oppose each other, but then quickly kind of fall for each other. And despite everything happening somewhat briefly, you still buy into it because of their chemistry. There's
a sizzle
really,
there.
really good together.
There's a sizzle there. There's a spiciness between them, and the fact that they do have such hot chemistry, like that's part of why the film works in many ways, because that's what this killer gets off on. Like
exactly.
Like that heated chemistry between them is, as they talk about in the movie, kind of a fetish for this killer, which I think is a pretty intriguing idea.
It is a good idea. I agree.
Yeah.
And maybe that's ultimately why I'm also disappointed with the horror, because I don't dislike the premise of the film. I do think it is an intriguing idea.
It's a cool conceit.
I just don't think the film follows through on it in a compelling way.
Yeah.
And the reveals at the end are ultimately mundane, and the execution again quite derivative, all the way down to bringing in certain tropes as far as you think your character's dead and then one more last go, and it's like, Jesus, like stop. You've gone too far.
The film was not particularly scary. I was never really on the edge of my seat in that regard. Again, not necessarily a bad thing for a movie that seems to want to prioritize itself as a comedy. But man, like this could have been something special for me, at least, and it sounds like for you as well, had both of those individual elements just had something really cool to offer. And the rom-com side does. The horror side does not.
Yeah, I agree. Still a fun movie overall. One I
still
enjoyed.
liked it. Yeah.
I would definitely encourage people to go and check it out at some point. Even if you don't want to go see it in theaters when it comes to digital, which, look, in 2025 is probably going to be on Valentine's Day. Or shortly thereafter. So that's just how it works now.
The horror film Companion, which we just reviewed last week, I think that's already been announced to come out on Valentine's Day.
See, there you go. 2 weeks. It was in theaters for 2 weeks. Unbelievable. And look, I mean,
yuck.
Hard Eyes came out this last weekend. By the time this episode goes out, it'll be almost Valentine's Day. So we're almost a week removed from when it came out. Even if it doesn't come out this weekend, next weekend, again, the 2 week period. If you want to celebrate Valentine's Day a week later and watch this when it comes out, sure, go ahead. You know, I understand. But if you want to go check it out in theaters, I don't think it's a waste of time or money either. I did enjoy it.
You'll get a fun romance movie.
Exactly. And look, with the way you have Regal Unlimited, you got the AMC A-list. If you're a member on either one of those, as we are, I mean, look, you have the opportunities, and it
might as well get your money's worth.
It's worth the use. Yeah, it's worth.
Might as well get your And this is a movie that's, I think, maybe including end credits, about 95 minutes long. It's a brief movie.
Yeah, it's rather brief for sure.
Yeah, so not a huge waste.
So look, I think with AMC now you get up to 4, or maybe that doesn't start until May, I think. So you still get the 3.
Yeah.
If you want to use all 3 on Friday and you want to see Cap, you want to see Paddington in Peru, and a little Hard Eyes action, triple bill, look,
there you go.
I think that'll be fine. That's a good Valentine's Day.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. Do you have any final thoughts on Hard Eyes?
Yeah, I just wish it was better. But I think there's a great movie in
the
here.
aesthetic, the mask and the aesthetic.
Oh, I like that. I actually did.
Yeah.
I did kind of like. I think I mentioned that earlier, and I don't know if it came through in the conversation, but I actually did like the look of Hard Eyes himself, the Hard Eyes killer. Which again, I think that just goes back to what we keep saying, that if anything, when it comes to how this functions as a horror film, there is just a lot of wasted potential in that regard.
Yeah.
Because I think the pieces were there.
Yeah. No, I agree. Apologies if I missed that earlier. But
Yeah, I don't know if it
I
came
do
through, but
agree.
yeah.
I think that's absolutely like I love the aesthetic of it. I do think it looks great, and again, it's why ultimately I'm disappointed with the tepid horror of the film.
Yeah, same
'Cause,
here.
like it just
Same here.
it wastes so much potential in that way.
Yeah.
But despite that, I love its self awareness. I love the comedy references of the film. Yeah, I did enjoy it on the whole.
All
So that is
right.
Hard Eyes. Hard Eyes, go see it. And if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, you can let us know. You can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. You can always email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. Be sure to go and check out our review if you want to indulge us. Our conversation on Love Hurts. We had a great time talking about it. It's not a good movie. I don't encourage people to go and see it, but if you've seen it, if you want to check out that conversation, we did have some fun talking about it. Episode 623, I especially encourage you to go and check out that show. We do talk about David Lynch. We do a retrospective, a full dive on his entire filmography. So we do hope people go and check that out. There was a new Chasing the Gold, as well as Shadon and Erica broke down all of the fun Critics' Choice and DGA and PGA from last weekend. That was really great. And there's going to be a new Women in Session coming out tomorrow as this episode is released. Brendan, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Oh, I'm just excited for Paddington to return to cinemas once again.
Yeah, I'm excited. There was one tweet going around that I sent to you about
that this is essentially the lost city of Z in the Paddington universe.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be crazy? If that's what that film ended up being, was the lost city of Z?
Oh, better, because this movie knowing that context, I mean, if it's not that, I'm going to be severely disappointed.
I know. That's all I'm hoping for is for a little Lost City of Z with Paddington and Peru.
I know. Seriously.
That would be great. All right. Well, with all of that said, I don't really have any other final thoughts. Go see Hard Eyes, and if there's a sequel, I just hope it's a rom-com. I just want a true rom-com with those two characters. That's all I want.
What would it be called? Hard Eyes? Let's see. Heart Ears?
Heart ears? Heart fingers? I don't know.
Heart?
Heart to heart. There you go.
Heart to heart. There you go.
The number 2 heart. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
All right. We've solved it, and we hope to see that in the next year. With all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Go see some Hard Eyes. Let's go.
Great chemistry.